Angeles. Tech Coast Angels is the largest angel investing group in the country. We have over 450 members in our 4 chapters. This event is put on by Tech Coast Angels of Los Angeles. We have over 100 members. Last year, Tech Coast Angels, just as an example, during a pandemic year, we funded over 64 different companies, which is pretty impressive in a normal year, but really impressive in a pandemic year. Again, we have the 4 chapters. LA, we have over 100 members. And our sweet spot are companies that seem to have a valuation of under 10 million, not always, but usually. And they seem to come to us for money from about $500,000 to $2 million. We believe that we occupy a crucial role in the ecosystem of the startup world in Los Angeles. And we encourage anyone who's not a member to look at us and possibly become a member. And of course, if there's any entrepreneurs out there, or you know any entrepreneurs who are looking for funding for a startup company, they should come to us at Tech Coast Angels, and we could help them with funding. We could help them with mentorship. Again, our members are really have a wide range of experience, and besides the money, you get a lot of mentorship from our folks. So it's a really wonderful organization. And to tell you about some of the upcoming events, I hand you off to our executive director, Arash Sani.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And to just describe what we have tonight, we have our Cannabis and Tech Investing panel, which is going to be phenomenal. Coming up on May 11th, we'll have a health and wellness panel. On May 25th, a digital marketing panel, and then June 8th, a cryptocurrency panel. So as you can tell, our panels are, vertical centric. And then to add on top of that, we have a female VC panel coming up on June 22nd. So stay tuned. You can visit our website at techcoastangels.la, and then there's an events tab that will be listing these events. So for those of you joining us today, we welcome you and keep up with what we're up to. Thank you.
All right. So we're supposed to have a third member on the panel, Sturgis Carbon, who's a CEO from Manifest 7. It's a publicly traded company, and hopefully he'll join us soon. But let's get started. Just before we get started, folks, it's going to be less than an hour. We'll probably be done by 7. We try to respect your time. And this is really for you, the attendees and people who are listening, to ask questions. I'll get it started. I could take up the hour easily. Jean could probably take up the hour herself. She's got a million things to say. But we really do want to be sensitive to you guys. We want to answer your questions. So as soon as you want, after we get started, please just raise your hand. I'll note you, or put your question in the chat room. But again, this is for you guys, so definitely feel free to ask. Can we start by asking you, Jean, and then Ron, just to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves and your role in the cannabis business.
So hi, everyone. Delighted to be here. I know Mitchell and team. I live in the People's Republic of New York City, and I couldn't be happier to be on with you all. And here's why. I am a longtime tech VC, and I have switched over 7 years ago to the dark side, and I am all in on the cannabis industry. I've been the co-founder of several funds. Most recently, a fund that we did, tech-enabled business services in New York City. I have invested as a GP in over 125 enterprise level software data companies. And I look back on my life and I realize I'm an early player, early in the tech world, starting back in the 80s. I was at Bell Labs, and very exciting to build products that way, and became an investor for Olivetti, the big European company, who saw before anybody that Europeans, that investing in US tech companies was a great idea because they wanted to distribute those products. So I was early to play in those early days of technology, then early to play in the internet days. And so and then early, we were one of the first, but not only to understand cloud-based computing, and we made our mark by being really one of the earliest investors in many SaaS-based companies. And our jewel in our crown was NetSuite. We were one of the few that understood that cloud-based computing would be the long tail. And so we invested about 30 or 40 cloud-based computing companies. And And so then I left 7 years ago, and that was the year that New York passed the Compassionate Care Act. And we became investors in we only have 10 licenses in the whole state of New York. And I said, uh-oh, I better learn this stuff. So started to go to the big conferences and learn the business. Hi, Sturgis, welcome. Sturgis and I were in Hong Kong together. That's the last time we were there in person. So I've gotten to travel the world, speaking about the wonders of the plant, trying to demolish the stigma, which has been around for more than 100 years. Telling people in Europe as they laughed at me, don't worry, it's coming. You know, you're laughing now, you'll see. And then being part of the buildup of the last 7 years, it has been really an exciting ride. I like to say, leveraging all my failures and screw ups and successes into this cannabis industry. It couldn't be more exciting.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Welcome, Sturgis. Before we get to you, Ron, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your business, please?
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Ron. I am the co-founder and CEO of GrowLens. GrowLens is a cannabis tech cloud-based software company. We specifically focus on cultivation, and our value proposition is to help streamline compliance reporting, help our users get their product to market faster. I ultimately got in this space. I'm born and raised in California, which has traditionally been a progressive market in the cannabis industry. I'm hearing a little echo, but I'm not sure where it's coming from.
It sounds like you're underwater just a tiny bit.
Yeah, let me see.
Or since I was going to make a joke about a bong hit, I guess.
Yeah, I like it. But yeah, so ultimately, born and raised here in California, where cannabis is really a big part of the ecosystem. Graduated in 2008 at a fun time, right in the middle of the, crisis, and went into B2B kind of corporate, selling SaaS, selling B2B for a couple publicly traded companies. Did that for about 7 to 8 years. And through that whole time, I was always involved with the cannabis industry as far as just on a personal level, growing a plant in a closet. We had the Proposition 215 that allowed you to be medical. You can have 12 plants. So kind of just learning about the plant on a personal level. I would have friends and we would kind of compete with each other to see who can produce the best on like a small personal level under Proposition 215. Fast forward, ultimately, after I left the corporate world and was able to scale that operation under Proposition 215 as a medical grower, kind of got my experience there. And while I was going through that process, we recognized that, hey, there's a lot of moving components, a lot of margin for error, and we really need a system that could kind of tie things together and make, make us produce, the highest quality of product and maximize, the facility we had. So ultimately, we built GrowLens. It was the platform we wish we had while we were going through the cultivation process. Still, really being hands-on with owner and operators to this day, really being in these facilities from a production side, seeing what it takes to, there's a saying, and how do they make the hot dog? It is not, it's nothing like that. It's actually a very cool process, and really seeing what they do on the operation side that affects the end user. So yeah, ultimately, we started GrowLens in 2018. We're currently in 4 states. Oklahoma has been a huge market for us recently. And yeah, that's kind of the short of me.
Thanks. Just full disclosure, I'm an investor in GrowLens through our fund, and I'm a member of ArcView. So I'm just full disclosure. Sturgis, thanks for joining. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please? And we know you're CEO of Manifest 7, but a little bit about your company too, please.
Yeah, no, of course. I'm sorry I'm a little late joining. Zoom just didn't want to cooperate this evening. So sorry about, I'm actually calling from my phone. Very millennial of me, I suppose. Yeah, I'm Serge Carbon. I'm the CEO of Manifest 7. Just quickly about me, about 20 years of investment banking, capital markets experience that dovetailed into ultimately building and selling businesses in a number of alternative verticals, everything from mining and natural resources to technology to life sciences to energy infrastructure. Got into the industry about 7 years ago with the formation of the predecessor company to M7, which was an ArcView member too, a company called MJIC. We were one of California's first venture funds at the time, made about 15 minority equity investments. I was on the board during that period of time and one of the first checks into the company around 2000, late 2016, early 17. Starting to see, the likely transitions coming from Prop 64 in California, what was happening up in Canada, multiples that looked very similar to those we saw in 1999, 2000. Thought it might be a good idea to leverage the domain expertise we had built as investors into an operating model. And that coincided with me taking over as CEO. And that was early 2017. Since then, what we've been building is a highly focused, integrated B2B and B2C platform. So on one side of our business is a statewide, California-focused, full-service distribution business that does everything from logistics and transport to commodity brokerage, bulk wholesale, wholesale to retail, and then light manufacturing, kind of the orphan license services that make sense to streamline into that. And then on the other side of the business, we have a full-blown omni-channel retail landscape. So brick and mortar dispensary storefront, which also gives you in-store pickup, local on-demand delivery, kind of capture the consumer last mile where our distribution business ends, create a direct-to-consumer value proposition, and then ultimately e-commerce and e-commerce subscription. And tying all of that together is an asset called 1-800-Cannabis, kind of like our Amazon.com singular portal. It's geocentrically agnostic that can travel with us as we move into other states to access that entire integrated ecosystem.
Thank you. Let me just start before we get into our world, the TCA world of startups. Just a question for, I guess, Sturgis, we'll start with you. And guys, feel free to answer it or not answer it. Just, you guys went public, or you're starting to trade last October, if I read correctly.
Yeah, no, September 30th, correct? Yeah.
September, yeah, of 2020. So just in general, it's been a crazy ride, and I didn't ever get into it personally, but the stock market seemed like a crazy ride. And what do you see now? Is it safe to get in there? What would you say to people looking to get into the stock market, either an index fund or, in cannabis space?
I think it's exactly the same as from a private perspective. You need to do a lot of due diligence. Yeah. I mean, look, from a market perspective, we've been generally pretty bullish, and I think our theory has been, and it seems to have been proven out really for the last couple of years, that this space, and the capital markets around it would ultimately develop very similar to how we've seen other nascent industries emerge and eventually evolve, right? So if you graph the NASDAQ, for example, from say 1998 to maybe 2002, and kind of that inflection point that we saw after the collapse of the dot-com bubble, and the rise of big tech and social media as we know it today, that's a major hockey stick. If you look at kind of the last 3 or 4 years in the CSE and all the public companies, Canadian or US or otherwise, and kind of overlay those graphs, it's a very similar type of pattern, and one that, where the inflection point probably lands in the overlap right about this time or a little earlier last year. So we went through the 1.0 shakeout, started to see fundamentals coming, into the companies, pushing through COVID and all of that kind of recession-proof validation we saw. So we think, at this point, it's still volatile. There's still a lot of development. It's still early, but we're seeing that trend now towards more of the fundamentals, professionalized management teams and governance. We've been through the shakeout, and there seems to be kind of just the organic tailwind underneath the industry from a market perspective, just by virtue of the way that it's evolving, kind of where it is in its life cycle, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the market obviously keeps growing, so there is the business there. But I saw those analogies to the internet. It really makes sense. Well, let's jump right into the kind of our world, the investing into startups. Maybe I'll start with you, Ron. How difficult is it when you start, I know you haven't started a business in a different industry, but what are some of the challenges you think that are specific to the cannabis industry when you start in a company? Is it the banking, the capital, raising? Is it the people just don't want to take you seriously because they think it's an under the counter kind of business, or not under the counter, but still a little bit hidden, still not completely legal? What are some of the challenges that you face?
Yeah, so I would say challenges specific to the cannabis industry. Yeah, I mean, banking has been a huge one. Traditionally there is institutions that are banking cannabis companies, but you have to be, operators know they have to go about it a certain way. They can't, they have to set up their businesses a certain way in order to get those services. Just specifically in a personal thing is we got kicked off Stripe, and Stripe was really good for us. We were getting really good analytics. We were able to control our our users and manage that process, but they kicked us off because they said, hey, you're related to the industry. So we had to be flexible. So things of that nature when it comes to payments and processing. That's why, I mean, I'm also bullish on crypto because I think there's opportunities to solve the payments gaps in cannabis with that.
Do you accept cryptocurrency for payment?
Not at this point, but our processor did add a plugin for that recently. So, I mean, that is something we project in the future. But yeah, I would say that's probably been one of the larger ones. Just in general, the Fed is just very, it's a lot of scrutiny on money moving and with these kind of industries. So, if you can't get the money to the bank and things of that nature, it does make it hard. So I would say that's one of the primary ones. But, there is also just a lot of the things that make it tough also make it exciting, being fresh and having that new energy behind it, and that opportunity to innovate. Another challenge is there's still kind of, processes and procedures being developed that are standardized across the industry. So end users can get a consistent product, it comes down to the consumer. So I feel like when you have a new industry, standardization is important. So end users could have a better experience. And I think it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity as well. So.
Hey, Mitchell, I'd love to key off of what Ron just said. And then there's this really goofy tax law called 280E. It's the stupidest thing.
Yeah.
Can you imagine only being able to deduct COGS, not ordinary and reasonable business expenses? Talk about what that does to your EBITDA or bottom line. It's pretty goofy. But here's where pattern recognition comes in, especially love to speak about this being a longtime tech investor. And that is, it's the same stuff. I do a very irreverent gig called 5 Stupid Things That Entrepreneurs Do Over and Over Again. Now, I don't leave out investors. My gig also includes 5 stupid things that investors do over and over again. There's 500 things, but I get it boiled down to the top 5. But it's the same stuff. And this is why, as our market expands, and Troy Dayton, the wonderful founder of ArcView, has a great line. He said, this marketplace is never going to be smaller than it is today. Last year produced $20 billion worth of revenue just from mostly sales of flower. That doesn't even include all the ancillary business. So what I'm saying is we want traditional tech investors, life science investors, health investors to come into our market and play. It will never be smaller than it is today. And you can use the very same knowledge, skills, screw ups, and everything that you have investing in traditional tech businesses. That's the fun part, because there's a lot of similarities. Now, there's plenty of complication, don't get me wrong. And by knowing that complication, that helps you skate the way. But that's where you reach out for other people who have a lot more domain knowledge in that space than you might have. And so I love to speak to that, because that's the thrilling part of taking those experiences, recognizing what dynamic leadership's all about, and then mapping that against what could be in this very still nascent, but such a big, robust marketplace.
And growing like crazy.
Yeah.
Just off of that, Gene, so you've obviously been in this business for a long time besides cannabis. And when you look at startups, there's a list of stuff you're supposed to look at. I guess it starts with a team and the growth potential and the competition and what problem you're solving and all the typical questions that you ask. But what's different about the cannabis industry when you're looking for it that you have to look at it as a different industry?
It is very complicated. And so you have to understand the regulatory complexities. You have to understand, the licensing issues, these tax issues. Are they even filing their tax returns? Are they considering the 280E issues? What's going on with all that? So that's really very important. But here's the other thing. Bill Gross, the famous investor of Idea Labs, one of your neighbors,
Yes.
he analyzed his hundreds of companies that he invested in back in the day. And there was one metric that was critical. Of course, we all know the team, and I believe the CEO is the most important person in the team. But the one metric is timing. And so that's where I have screwed up because I can see the future. That doesn't mean it's the right time to take your wallet out. And if I've made mistakes in tech or in cannabis, it's not necessarily been because the CEO wasn't great or the product wasn't great, because the world wasn't ready for this yet. It got outsmarted by something else, or, we weren't ready to take that on. And so it'd be very fun to hear your comments, Ron and Sturgis. People are active operators in this business because that's what I look for. Is it the right timing for this product? And there's one big difference that we love to point out that are those of us in this business that's different from the internet days. The market is here today. Back in the day, we were saying, what could be, what's going on? When I was at AT&T, do you know what they used to say? This is so embarrassing. How are we going to compete against the internet? So those days are over. The marketplace is here, and that's the exciting part. But is the timing right for this product? Or can you be, can you see around the corner with this?
Sturgis, you want to add something to that, or did you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's interesting. This industry is still in building the railroads before it's laying the fiber optic, I think. Yeah. And we've kind of, that's been our focus, for example, is the infrastructure. And of course, there's virtual aspects of that. But I think fundamentally, before you even get to, a McKinsey review of how to optimize efficiency and, all the technology solutions, you literally need to have just kind of the long haul backbone, right? And so I think, yes, I think all of that's here to a large extent. It's coming. But I think that, the kind of prerequisite to even getting there is you got to be in the dirt a little bit more first, so to speak. But it is around the corner. It's here now to some extent.
So Sturgis, you guys, you provide a host of services. I was looking at it. It's fascinating. What have you seen as the most in demand? And what do you see being most in demand of your services or other services in the coming years?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's primarily actually on the B2B side, it's bulk supply, right? That's the heartbeat of the whole industry. And it ultimately flows all the way down to, just the production of the oil, which in of itself is like the high fructose corn syrup of this space, right? It's in everything. So it's, I think the kind of the bulk wholesale on the distribution side. On the retail side, what I think people are really looking for is a more rationally merchandised product portfolio. There's a lot of I don't know what you want to call it. It's cyclical or it's fluid and dynamic. You kind of have a surge of market leaders and then they kind of fall back. And then there's another one that, another generation that comes through. So I think it's more the stability and regularity of the product offering to a large extent on the B2C side.
And Ron, for you, like how has your business been growing? Is it more just the straight compliance? Is it helping growers manage? Is there other areas that you're getting into that you didn't see a couple of years ago when you started your business?
I feel like one of the larger areas is compliance. I like to say there's 3 pillars to hold up a operation. Compliance is one. 2, it's growing the product, and 3, it's, you know, kind of managing your processes and procedures. But, you know, looking at a market like Oklahoma, they recently they recently adopted a whole track and trace system and made that mandated to prevent diversion to the, you know, illicit market. So, you know, compliance has been the driving force that has, you know, been getting people to our platform. And then we're also learning that, you know, people still do need guidance on, you know, managing a facility as an operator. We see so many facilities that might have capital, but, you know, might lack experience.
You got to send them to Sturgis.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we are seeing those type of people, but yeah, ultimately compliance has been a huge thing, because, you know, there are operators, even the operators that are experienced with the cultivation process, don't know anything of, are kind of being blindsided by, you know, these new compliance requirements that they have to do to kind of document everything that goes on in their operation. So yeah, that's a big driver.
You know, let me ask, by the way, folks, if you want to ask a question, please just raise the hand and we'll notice you, or just put something in the chat room and we'll ask. Well, let me ask just in general, and maybe I'll direct the start with Gene. Given that things are still shaking out in the federal level in America with laws and everything, it's going to take a while. Should people who are investing, we generally seem to hope that, you know, you could get paid out, the company will go public, or there's an exit in 5 to 10 years. Are we thinking that if we're in the cannabis space, you just got to be really patient with your capital more than in other industries?
Well, one might say that to sound and be conservative, but we who are playing don't really believe that, because here's why. As you know, my very senator is Chuck Schumer. He is determined to make change, and he knows he's got a short window. You know, we're fearful of what could happen at the midterms. So he knows he's got to have momentum. So he wants to pass legislation that takes THC off of Schedule 1, where it should never have been in the first place. Cannabis being on Schedule 1 has nothing to do with health of cannabis. It has a lot to do with racist, sorry to say, white men that did this to us 100 years ago. And it had a lot to do with competition for hemp, a lot of bullshit that has nothing to do with the wellness of the plant. So it is time to take it off Schedule 1, where it sits with LSD and heroin. Although LSD.
And what do you think? And what do you think? Sorry, you were talking about Senator Schumer, right? Is that who you were referring to?
Chuck Schumer is determined, as the lead dog in the Senate, to get support for a couple of big legislation. And of all people, Kamala Harris was the Senate co-sponsor of what's called the MORE Act. And so there's a few things floating around. The safe banking, like Ron was mentioning, which has just recently been reintroduced through the House and passed. And now this MORE Act, which will take THC off of Schedule 1, and it will actually throw the action to the states. So if you don't want it in Idaho, you don't have to have it. Right. Now there's some thinking that the complexities of both of these, they could be merged together. So what I'm saying is, we believe something will happen over the next year and a half before the 22 midterms. That, don't stand by the door. That's going to be big, because here's what happens. Big institution comes in with their money. We want that. The big new exchanges in the US will take these companies and put them on their exchanges. We want that. We want a big banking to come in and play. We want companies from Canada and from other parts of the world and the US to merge and consolidate. We want best of breed tech companies, of which there's a dearth of tech in cannabis. This shocks me as a longtime tech investor. There's a dearth of technology. As Ron shows you here, he built a tech company because he couldn't go to traditional tech. We want those companies to buy our best of breed companies. We want Ron's company to be acquired by a great tech company, because they want that embedded base and they want what he's built. So that's what's going to happen, and we believe sooner than later. I don't want to.
The big one is the SAFE Act. Of all the federal legislation. That's the number one thing. that
It's
has to
going to
happen.
help, but the real big one will be to take THC off of Schedule 1. Now, you still, according to these laws, because we're too stupid as a country to do it like Canada, you still, after that happens, won't be able to ship your best product from California to New York. But you will be able to decide and make legislation in your state to do whatever you need to do. And so that's going to be the big one. It's possible those two bills could be merged because of the complexity and what's going on. But what I like to say too is this. The green wave and the dynamics around what's happening now, as we move from a $20 billion business to a $100 billion business over the next several years, is happening because of what's going on with this blue wave of the Senate being Democratic, even though this polls now 72% that people in the US want, medical or adult use. What's happening is that we have to get to a point where we can create this so that there's even more action. And what I was going to say is so important is now the East Coast wave is finally arriving. So I love to also share this. People don't understand this. The reason why the West Coast states, certainly California, Colorado, Washington, those states got way ahead. First, they were smart enough to have what's called a citizen's ballot. We don't have that for most states in the East Coast, except for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They had that. And even New Jersey, which recently, had legislation in November, that really wasn't. That was just a citizens' initiative, but it didn't declare it. Our legislatures have to declare these laws. So when New York passed on March 31st, hey, we're finally coming into enlightenment. That is not a citizen's ballot. That's the legislature. That's why it's been so hard and long standing on the East Coast. And let me remind people, from Maine to Florida, there's 120 million people. So finally, this is happening with these state legislatures. So that's what's driving a lot of this from both the Congress and Senate, as well as the people of the US who want this. And to your point, Mitchell, the future consolidation that will continue to accelerate.
Great.
It's
okay, we got a bunch of questions. So I'm going to let Catherine, do you want to ask your question or would you like me to? You could unmute and ask it.
Sure, good evening. I just had a question about what you thought. I'm an IP attorney, and I just wanted to know what you thought about what role patents maybe played in your investment decisions in cannabis-related companies.
Who wants to take that? That seems like a Sturgis one, maybe, or
Yeah.
taking that Sturgis?
Yeah, I mean, it's not particularly relevant in a kind of specific way for us. I think it has application across the industry. I mean, if you're a cultivator, the IP in your strain is obviously very important and marketable. And that's, I think, probably the IP that most people think about is the genetics. As a distributor for us, we're pretty much genetics agnostic, right? We distribute and sell everything. From a commercial perspective, it's absolutely, the kind of restrictions on IP and enforcing it is, I think, part of the broader package, I guess, with some of the just, nascency of the space. So in the same way that banking is there's friction on that, or the major exchanges, all of the things that we've been talking about, IP just seems to be somewhat secondary, other than in the core place on the genetic side. Most people don't really think about it because there doesn't seem to be as much ability to enforce those rights, given it's federally adjudicated, I think. So, from our perspective, it's less critical because we're agnostic to anything. Where it comes to bear is, I guess, on our brand protection. And I think that's probably true for a lot of operators that aren't cultivators per se. And I'm sure for someone like Ron, obviously IP around technology, but it's a totally different conversation. So I don't know if that helps frame it. I'm probably not the best person to ask that, because where most people think of IP in the space, we're not specifically focused on any one, kind of individual thing.
Ron, do you have any, do you have IP protection? Do you have any problems with that or on your own business?
From a technology perspective, we're not patenting. We don't have any patents in place for our platform. However, our platform can help the cultivator document their process and their cultivation process and their outcomes, so they can kind of patent those standard operating procedures in that part of their business. I'd also love to speak to, Matt Thompson's question as
Go
well.
ahead. You want to read it? Read it for him because he just walked away for a second.
Yeah, he kind of talked about some trends in terms of M&A activity in the cannabis industry. And I just wanted to throw out, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the Hawthorne Group, which is kind of been a big player on the ancillary side. They've been acquiring pretty much a lot of the nutritional companies, ancillary companies, lighting companies. So as Gene was saying, consolidation is happening from an ancillary side. And, this entity called the Hawthorne Group is kind of leading the way. And I do project seeing more of that activity, as things start to consolidate more.
Here's a little bit more on the IP. So I do agree it's very segment specific. For example, we've invested in a synthetic cannabinoid company. They are making cannabinoids in the lab. This took me a long time to get my head wrapped around that. Like, how do you smoke that, right? But we've now come to understand that food and beverage companies will want a consistent product that they could, build in the lab. And so there's a lot of IP protection around that, how they're doing it, the process, as well as the inventiveness around that. It's very interesting. And then right now, you may be aware that beverages are finally coming into their own.
Yeah.
And the reason that they haven't till now, I don't know if you've tried anything from beer that's been derived from cannabis. Oh my golly, most of them just suck so badly. Give me a Stella and give me a token, I'm happy, Don't give me funky beer. But there's some wonderful new beverages that are now on the marketplace that are seltzers with the flavorings and some delicious goodies. It's finally happening. Well, that's a decision. Do you want to invest in a beverage company? And believe me, there's some great ones,
Yeah.
especially in California. We can hardly wait on the East Coast to have these beautiful brands that you all have built in California. So there's lots of investing opportunities still for you there. However, we have decided to look into the supply chain instead. The ingredients part that make that up, some of the emulsion technologies, very exciting. And there's IP around those because that's specialty world there. So we look for that, and that's pretty interesting.
Keith.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ron.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, nano emulsion technology is awesome. And there is a company out there that specializes in that, so it makes it easier to put in these beverages and candies, and it really allows the end user to get a quicker, cleaner experience.
I know the beverage folks, like the alcohol people, are nervous that they're going to lose a lot of market share to cannabis infused beverages. I guess.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sturgis.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought I was saying this is something we see on the distribution side, the beverage category for sure, and the economics are in terms of growth and the rate of growth, and the economics, kind of through most of the supply chain are really advantageous too. There's certainly better margins for us in distributing a product that's specialized, for example. So there's that component. I think it begs an interesting question around the scalability of the space and how it evolves, which is, the on-site consumption or the social aspects of this in a public venue. That's a huge missing piece of the industry, right? That's not quite there yet. Beverages will be the key to that, as they have been with everything else. And, and just figuring out how that gets dosed the right way, in time for, I think, some of the relaxation around on-site consumption, that's really probably the inflection point where this category looks a lot more like alcohol. And it's kind of crazy to think there's no B2B selling into bars and restaurants yet, and so that's a huge missing piece of the market. That's going to catch up relatively soon. You can see that in the numbers, the way that beverages are selling. We're getting closer on the consumer side. I think on the manufacturer side, getting closer to cracking that code.
And like I know they talked about it, West Hollywood had approved before the pandemic a couple of cafes.
Yeah.
So I assume when that starts opening up again.
Yeah, listen to this, Mitchell. 13 consumption lounges just in West Hollywood.
Yeah.
Wow.
I believe that.
13.
All right, we got a bunch more questions. I want to try to get to them if we can. Keith, are you still on? And would you like to ask your question, Keith Richter?
Yes, good evening, everybody. My question is, I've got the opportunity to invest in a startup growing facility in the state of Michigan. The founder and operators are experienced growers in Washington State. And my question is about valuation metrics, how you would value an investor's percentage ownership versus the founder operators. Is there anything unique to cannabis, or is this more of a standard valuation exercise?
I'll start. Sturgis, add in, and Ron. There's nothing standardization about these valuations. It is all over the place. And it does vary, though, by locality. So the way to protect yourself, and by the way, Michigan's up and down. It's good, but it's bad. There's been a lot of trouble and trauma in Michigan. And so the best way to protect yourself is to find other license holders that are there or investors and get your comparisons that way. There's no book of comps to look at. You're gonna have to just crawl your way, talk to other bankers, talk to other people who are playing in the state. I can certainly connect you if you need that, and get your calibration that way. And it's that way in other states too. I deal a lot in Massachusetts. We will be dealing with New York soon. And it's craziness, complete craziness.
Ron or Sturgis, do you want to add or not? Okay. Jared, could you ask your question, please?
You bet. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, just curious about what the picture looks like going forward, regulatory as under maybe a couple different scenarios if interstate trade becomes available, knowing that some supply markets like California, there's a glut of production, which is leading to a little bit of a margin squeeze. And then you've got other kind of up and coming states that are just getting into it, where obviously the price per the economics are much different. What does that picture look like as regulation maybe starts to open up, interstate trade happens, or do you feel that that's going to be continue to be insulated for quite a while?
Well, you're right to ask about it. I happen to know the architect. His name is Adam Smith. Don't you love that? It's perfect for this. He's in Oregon, and he has figured this out. And he, in fact, is the one who helped produce a law in Oregon that could open up things for them. But this is going to come down to states' rights. And so what we believe will happen is first, we've got to have this MORE Act happen. That's going to open up things. And then we believe the states will be able, especially contiguous states. So Oregon that has an oversupply and wants to send it to places in California, or California that wants to send it to other states. We believe it'll happen in contiguous states. We absolutely believe it will also happen on the East Coast, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. In fact, Cuomo has created a 15-state coalition that he did with COVID. And now they're thinking about this for cannabis. Now, it's not here yet, but we absolutely believe it will come down to a states' rights issue and that it will happen. And that's really going to continue to blow open things. And certainly people in certain states, I had to learn this, have a very snobbish view about, oh, I wouldn't smoke that dry flower grown in a warehouse in Colorado. I want beautiful, lush, outdoor grown, sun grown, Oregon and California flower. So there's a lot of that going on, and we can't wait. We know it's a thing of the future. Timing uncertain. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think once it happens, because I think it's part of the question that was asked too, is, you know, what does the landscape look like from there? And it's funny, I've been saying for a while, I think this kind of touches on an earlier question about legalization. And if we were talking about that maybe a year ago, I would have said, you know, be more strategically patient because it's going to take a little time. I think that if your imagination isn't going next to the global opportunity in this, then you're behind the curve 5 years ago in 2017, right? So that's where this moves next. And what has to happen first, after you get federal legalization or the removal of the interstate ban, I think the question was the impact on kind of the margins. And that's really kind of the fundamental point here, right? We're all operating in this highly fragmented environment that basically no other industry. I mean, I guess you could draw the line to some extent to alcohol and you know, insurance, but you still physically cross state lines. Like there's I think so much latent inefficiency that comes out of that fragmentation that's either just excessive cost, whether it's excessive taxation because the municipalities are just in their land grab from that perspective, they haven't thought it through, to, you know, competing with a black market that still is very prevalent and what that does to pricing, 280E and the tax issues there from a federal perspective. There is so much friction on operators right now that the minute some of that starts to alleviate, this is like altitude training and, you know, for a marathon. You know, once you come down to sea level, that unlocks, I think, a lot of efficiency and normalization across the board. So what we're dealing with right now is like the industry-wide burn period, where it kind of has to build and unlock into a more normalized commercial structure. Once that happens, the margins here will actually be extremely good. And I think you're going to find the industry organize itself and calibrate in a much more rational way. You know, once you remove those artificial barriers and you look at a state like California, and sure, there's probably some need interstitially in the middle of the country and then certainly on the East Coast, but it's not like you're really going to need that much grow capacity in, say, South Dakota at that point. You're going to have kind of the localized nodes, both within North America and then around the world. We all know where they are. It's economic to grow it there. The climate is ideal. And that's going to be basically the bread baskets, so to speak, or the bread baskets of this space into a global supply chain. And it'll just become more efficient from there. So that's where the strategic patience is probably left, is in that happening to see the commercial outcome of it to a large extent.
You know, maybe want to go on this a little bit. Derek asked the question. I see the 280 and the financial rules as a risk to the cannabis business. And I guess it seems like you guys are saying it's going to change quick enough, but will it change quick enough, or are they really are those a real threat to the business?
Is that to me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that people take for granted and don't think through a lot. We're talking about the federal government. This may legalize sooner than we think, insofar as the legislation actually is passed. Look at how long it took to implement legalization in just California. Now think about that in the hands of the federal government. And, you know, wherever it's adjudicated to a large extent, whether it's even at the state level, to your point, Gene, but there's no magic wand here. It's going to take a little bit of time for, once we've had the cathartic moment and the law has changed, implementation, adoption, adaptation, all of that, that's a while. And I think that's going to take longer than people think, actually.
So I just have one last question because it is 6:57. Well, also I want to make sure that Gene Sturgis, if there's something that you want to talk about, please do. But just looking forward, what is exciting 5 years from now, 3 years from now, around the corner? Somebody was saying mushrooms. There's an article about mushrooms being something to look at, which kind of surprised me, but I guess Oregon has already somewhat legalized it. But what else is there? There's all these different cannabinoids. Is it technology, like you say, Gene, that you don't see there? Where do you think the opportunities might be in a couple of years?
Yeah, it's all pretty exciting. Yes, it is true. The whole psilocybin world is upon us. There's some real zealots that really believe to their core. Uh, this is hard for me to say because I do. Uh, I have a close investor friend, and when I try to get him going on cannabis, he says to me, "Hey, tell me when the cocaine conference is." So I'm kind of a purist, and I really don't want anything to take away from cannabis, but my cannabis friends are very much into psilocybin. I have very conservative physician friends, and there's a lot of science around mushrooms and the what it can do for PTSD, MDMA. Also, a lot of science has been proven by very conservative research work that proves that it not only can eliminate, reduce PTSD, but eliminate it. So you want to believe in, I believe in science and the data, but I don't want anything to take away from our movement to get rid of the stigma on cannabis, to open up, blow open the US. Why should we be a laggard to Canada or to other countries, to South America, to now Mexico's coming on? They might lap us now in their policies and regulations and openness. So I want to see us just be able to build a great product in California and ship it to New York. I want to fix these silly 280E stupid tax rules, and I want big tech and other players to play, and certainly a banking. That's again, the stupidest thing, that we can't have freedom on banking and credit card use. So that's the future of what's coming, is those shackles will be removed.
Sturgis, what do you think? What's around the corner that we should all invest in, that you're looking at on your personal investments in cannabis? If you are.
Oh, there's a great company on the CSE called Manifest 7, but I actually agree with everything Gene just said, particularly about the cyber market. I think you're right, and I wonder about that too, what the impact will be on this. I would start looking. I think it's hard to play the brand game, and everybody does that. Everyone's looking for the kind of the next brand, and I don't even know if we have the existing ones yet. There really isn't a Coke or a Pepsi. But I think we are finding now that, there's enough, geographic area with, a diversity of products that now not technically cross state lines, but are operating in multiple states, that are starting to get to that kind of brand equity level. I'd be looking at the brand side of this now, because I think there's enough of the infrastructure coming to actually exploit them in the right way. And that's probably, that's kind of where I would land, I think, right now.
Seth Rogen got a lot of attention because I guess he started a new brand. And Ron, where do you see it? What do you think? If you're talking to us, we're investors, we're looking around, trying to figure out what the next big hot thing, or which part of the industry is undercapitalized or is going to really jump forward. What do you see?
Yeah, so just to kind of piggyback off of what Sturgis said about brands, I do believe you will eventually have these big household brands for psilocybin or for cannabis products. I also believe that's only one component. I like to think of it as and also to speak to the previous question about protecting your margins, I feel like it's a holy trinity. I mean, one, obviously the brand is important, but you got to have that brand on top of, really tight business production processes. And also, if you think about McDonald's, they're a real estate company. So you look at these markets that are announcing that, hey, we might legalize it. We're introducing a bill, and you get in on commercial real estate projects. I feel like that can go a long way. So when you have like real estate, you have really good experienced operators and processes, and you put a brand on top of that, I feel like that insulates you for federal legalization and really positions that company well. Also feel like when federal legalization comes, all indoor production will probably go to the middle America where property is cheaper. and you know, the outdoor and greenhouse production that they can produce. They have the core competency of the sun in California, you know, and they also have legislation coming out about the origins of appellations, which allows you to say, hey, this was patented for Humboldt County, or this is from Trinity County, similar to wine. So those type of things are going to protect the margins, and those are the type of the things in the future. There's also they're developing the certified organic program. So as consumers become more educated, it opens up the opportunity for a vast new set of products, and the industry will just continue to evolve. But yeah, it's exciting.
Mitchell, let me key off of one more thing too. That's also a very allied business to us, and that's industrial hemp. It's still nascent, it's early days, but there's now a focus on ESG, which, you know, what is going on with sustainability? Cannabis is a real demon on water and energy use, so we want to have conservation around that. There's some wonderful new technologies that are happening there. And on industrial hemp, amazing things from construction materials to it could replace plastic water bottles. And there's initiatives already on that. That's pretty thrilling. Auto parts are already being built. There's some incredible things that industrial hemp are going to produce. And that marketplace is even going to be bigger than the THC world. So that's your hot tip of the next decade.
But hemp as a fiber for like rope and things like that, is that what the hemp?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The
Industrial hemp.
textiles, more and more textiles use. You know, farmers used to be commanded to
Yeah.
grow hemp for rope and for sales of
Right.
ships. And then that got thrown out. So now it's back. And now the industrial side is pretty exciting what's going on. So if you want to see the next big thing, start watching for innovation there. And it's already here and happening.
Yeah. Have you guys invested in ArcView and hemp companies yet?
Yes, we have, and we now have a big initiative towards it. Yes.
Great.
Pretty thrilling.
Any questions from the audience before we shut this down? We've been over an hour, and I said we'd keep it to an hour. Okay. And then we'll ask you guys if you have anything else to share. But I would say just folks who need any kind of compliance testing or know people in the business that need some. Need some help with their systems, the computer systems. Ron Johnson, GrowLens, that's a company to go to. If you want to invest in an up and coming company that was listed on September 30th, and that offers a suite of services to this nascent industry, please definitely check out Manifest 7. And if you're looking for the top venture firm in cannabis, go to ArcView and go to Gene Sullivan. And
Aren't you kind? Thank
yeah,
you.
all wonderful folks. Thank you so much. If there's anything else that you guys want to leave us with, we'll start with anyone. Any of you three.
I like to quote my favorite African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I really believe in combining with other people smarter than you are in the domain before you take your wallet out. And hey, come play with us. I welcome anyone to connect with me. I'm happy to meet you and hear you.
And we want to do syndicated deals with you guys from TCA. We talked about that a year ago, I know.
Yes, let's go. Yes,
let's
thank
do
you.
Sturgis.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always great to chat. And I'm not sure if I have any words of wisdom to leave with. I think the conversation was actually pretty robust. So just thanks for having me. Sorry for being a little late.
Thanks for coming, Sturgis. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ron, any last comments for us?
I just want to say thanks for having me. Look forward to maybe continuing the conversation with some of you. I would say at a high level, Gene kind of touched on it. I think sustainability in this industry is going to be big. You look at other industries that have, that become big, but have the reputation for not being friendly to the environment. So yeah, I feel like that's kind of going to be a big thing and something to keep at the top of mind as well. So.
Great. Guys, We do these events, it seems like every 2 weeks. Check us out, Tech Coast Angels, the #1 angel group in America. Thank you all for being on the panel. Thank you, guests, attendees, and everybody. Thank you all for participating. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for a great presentation.